Do you think it's getting harder to do good in our modern society? Is the world getting worse, or has it always been this bad? And what happens when your moral code fails to bring about good? In this final installment of our crime series, we analyze the Coen Brothers' thought-provoking film, No Country for Old Men, based on the book by Cormac McCarthy. It is one of only 4 Westerns to ever win the Oscar for Best Picture. And a research study in Belgium concluded that its villain, Anton Chigurh, is the most clinically accurate portrayal of a psychopath ever put to film. The older I've gotten, the more bitter I find myself getting at the people who try to take advantage of us, or just cause chaos and violence for the sake of it. I mean, we see these people on the news. And while not providing us with clear answers, No Country for Old Men does give us space to grapple with those bitter feelings, while reassuring us that evil has always been present in this world, and each generation needs to figure out how it's going to confront it. Joining us once again is professional screenwriter Kyle Arrington, who wrestles with us through this challenging commentary about confronting arbitrary violence in our chaotic world. This episode was released previously under the All Things Narrative podcast, and I encourage you to stick around till the end where I share some additional thoughts that were not present in this recording over a year ago. All right, let's begin our wayward journey through No Country for Old Men. Welcome to the Live a Meaningful Story podcast, where we analyze stories and films that help us make sense of life. We are 4 friends with backgrounds in storytelling, filmmaking, teaching, and narrative therapy. Join us on our quest towards telling and living our stories more meaningfully. I'm Derek Hatch.
My name is Nick Natat.
Hello, everybody. I'm Joseph Wilson.
I'm Jason Lin.
All right, let's get started with the letterbox description, and then we will dive right in. There are no clean getaways. Llewellyn Moss stumbles upon dead bodies, $2 million, and a hoard of heroin in a Texas desert. But methodical killer Anton Chigurh comes looking for it, with local sheriff Ed Tom Bell hot on his trail. The roles of prey and predator blur as the violent pursuit of money and justice collide.
I guess just to open up, when I first watched this movie, I saw a briefcase of money, a guy who was trying to hold on to it and fight his way against some psychopath that was just, like, this guy was crazy and unstoppable. And I had to watch it again, and I don't think I really got the point of the movie until I took a lot of my focus off of Anton Chigurh, which is the main antagonist. And he is so cool. He's just draws your attention the whole time. But it was the sheriff and watching him that really showed me what the point of this movie was about.
Yeah,
and
I
it's
agree.
About crime. It's about violence. It's about violence changing. Derek and I were talking about this. It's about violence changing and becoming more perplexing and just hard to understand.
And malevolent.
Right? Yeah, like just without passion. And that was what Sheriff Bell was saying in the beginning, is that he didn't know what to make of this one case. It was his sentencing and testimony, and this man had killed a 14-year-old girl. Paper said it was a crime of passion, but the guy told him there was no passion to it. He was fixing to kill someone for as long as he could remember. He knew he was going to hell. Be there about 15 minutes. And he doesn't even know how to comprehend that. And the thing that he said in the beginning, that's probably when I finished the movie, I went back to watch it. It really got to me. He said it was him not being sure about what he was doing. And he said, I always knew I was willing to, you had to be willing to die to do this job. He's a sheriff. But I don't want to put my chips forward and get into something that I don't understand.
Yeah.
A man would have to put his own soul at hazard. You'd have to say, all right, I'll be a part of this world. And towards the end of the movie, he retires because he couldn't do it anymore. It was just too much to fathom. The destruction, the murder of Anton and what he was doing, and also just of the cartel and everything. He told his cousin he felt overmatched. And Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think the first time you watch the movie, you're very focused on Josh Brolin's character and Anton Chigurh, right? You're really focused on them. But I think when you watch it again, focus on the sheriff. And that's what I did this time is I want to really understand his character better. And that's when the themes and everything, I think, really click for me. Is that kind of your experience too, Kyle?
Yeah, I mean, one of the most important things that I try to teach my students is how you use character as theme.
Yeah.
And this is one of the absolute best examples of character as theme. And it's also from the point you mentioned, and from the monologue on, he is representing the point of the movie.
Yeah.
We are plopped right into an understandable protagonist, Josh Brolin, up against a terrifying foe. Right. So in a standard archetypal story sense, we know exactly who we're rooting for. It's that guy, right? Obviously. And it's interesting because I also, by the way, the name Ed Tom Bell, it's the best freaking name ever for the sheriff. Sheriff Ed Tom Bell. Ed Tom. Everybody calls him Ed. Ed Tom. He doesn't actually show up. Tommy Lee Jones doesn't show up until 28 minutes into the movie, which is amazing. And then, spoiler alert, Josh Brolin dies with 25 minutes remaining. And from that point, so it's the first, so we as an audience are lulled into the sense of who the story is about.
Absolutely.
But then when he's murdered off screen,
off
screen with the sound of a train in the background.
Yep.
Coming of death.
Yes. There's a train. You can actually hear a train motif, right? When somebody's going to die.
Yeah, there's a train motif, which we can get into it. But the thing, one of my favorite is the most subtle hints to it at the very end, which is when he comes out of Carla Jean's house, the kids drive by on their bikes and their bikes sound like little trains. So that's the hints that he actually killed.
For me, the hint was he was checking his shoes.
Yeah.
The shoes,
So what he said before is about the coin, which I'll probably bring it up later, but about fate, which is his rationale.
Yeah.
Well, this film is in terms of theme and a character, right? The way I understand it is it's about confronting the arbitrary nature of violence and greed. And I think how those work together.
Yeah.
And I think the sheriff is kind of like that figure who is confronting it. And then it's set up like a Western where you have your good character, your morally gray character, and your rotten character, right? Your good, bad, ugly, right? Just like you find that Lewin, right? That's how you say his name? Lewin. All right. I always have a hard time with his name for some reason.
Little Wayne.
Lewin. Yeah. So Lewin, right? He kind of Llewellyn, thank you. Llewellyn like stumbles into this whole thing. We don't really know like what his whole deal is. He just kind of finds the briefcase, right?
He's a welder.
Yeah.
Well, okay, yeah, but
he's just a welder.
Yeah.
A welder, a vet, and
that's it.
Right, that's all we know.
A husband.
Yeah. But he kind of stumbles into this thing. And of course and this is going to tie into the end of the movie. You see that he finds this money and he's just like, well, this drug cartel, I might as well just take it. Why not? Why not? And it's that like greed of like, I see it, so I have to have it. And even though we really like him and he's a really good morally character, we see that this is going to be his ultimate downfall. Getting caught up in this, he's not going to be able to get out. And the movie actually sets up really well that in spite of how good of a guy he is, he's caught up in the same drama as everybody else. And it's the moment that you see Anton Chigurh early in the movie.
With the deputy?
So no, after the deputy, you see him shooting, right? You see him aiming, and when he breaks out of the
and he kills the deputy.
He kills the deputy.
He said, and then he holds the cattle. He says the same.
What does he say? What does he say? Yep.
Just hold still.
Just hold still. That's right.
And
so
that's what Josh Brolin says.
That's his first line as well. Is you see Josh Brolin aiming, right? So you literally see these two guys are on the same path, even though now
both sides of the same coin.
Both sides of the same coin.
Seeing their target as an animal.
Yes.
They're hunters.
They're hunters.
But there's also this like a lack of emotional connection to what they're hunting. Like
purpose driven.
And there's
that's why he has the cattle thing, right?
So there's this scene where Anton Bell is talking to Carla Jean.
Why you say it like that? You did that on purpose.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was fun to say. I just want to do it. But, and then you can hear me say it again if you missed it.
Go ahead.
If you miss hearing it. So he's talking to Llewellyn's wife, and he's giving her the story about the guy who was slaughtering his cattle because she's saying, he's my husband don't quit. He'll take all comers. And, you know, that's how we'll always see this hero in a movie who's just a nobody that all of a sudden is like, can get out of any situation.
Which is how he's set up to be.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
And we see guys like this all the time. And the sheriff says the story about the guy who tried to kill this beef that was, you know, getting violent when he was about to be butchered, and the guy shot the cow in the head, and it glanced off and hit the guy. And he said, even in the struggle between man and steer, there's no certainty.
Yeah.
And he says that, and there's a pause and goes, but then again, these days they do it differently. They have an air gun that shoots a rod real quick into the thing's brain, doesn't even know it hit it, and goes out. And that's the weapon that Anton uses. And because at first the sheriff's like, how is there an entry wound, no exit wound, and no bullet? What's going on? Then he realizes that. And what's cool is that if there's anyone that speaks with the most certainty in the movie, it's Anton.
Yeah.
100%.
And that's why he uses that.
Mm-hmm.
He uses the right tool. You pick the one right tool, which is what he told the executive when he shot him. Because he's like, you gave all these people receivers. And the accountant's like, we thought with more people, there'd be a better chance. And he goes, that's foolish. You picked the one right tool. He's got the one right tool. He's got his shotgun with the silencer, and he's got the bolt killer, and that's it. But he uses what has certainty, and not only that, he's seeing it as a man killing cattle. There's no connection.
Well, he's such a fascinating, I mean, fair to say he's one of the great antagonists in film, especially in modern day, right? But I mean, I think what's so fascinating about him, and there's a lot of similarities, like he's kind of the opposite coin, but very similar to like Heath Ledger's Joker, right? But he's a very serious character, but he represents this kind of inevitable like chaos that's going to disrupt everything. I think he's more of an elemental villain, an idea, right? Than a person. Kind of like what we talked about with The Godfather. There's like this code that he has, this code of his own morality, because this is a pretty lawless world, so you have to establish your own morality in it, right? And we'll talk about the whole like absence of God theme later with this story, because I think that's a part of it too. But you have like these moments where you see these interesting sides of him, like with the guy in the shower who's begging for his life, and he closes the curtain, like he can't, you know, he doesn't want to look. He's like that immovable
He doesn't want to
object.
get dirty.
I feel like it's more that he doesn't want to come out with blood on him. I don't think it's morality thing. I don't know.
Well, no, I don't think it's a compassion thing. I think it's like a weird, like, it's like this weird, like, yes, exactly. I think it's more of that. And then there's moments in the film where he doesn't quite know what to do. So like with the convenience store guy, clearly one of the things in Anton's code of ethics is like this guy inherited the store and it really bothers him.
You earn what you have.
Yeah. And it's really funny to see, because there's a lot of really subtle humor in this movie. It's really funnier than we think it is, right?
He chokes on the peanut. He's like,
yeah,
you married into it?
Yeah. So that's part of his ethics, right? Is like, you work for it, you earn it. And this guy clearly didn't. And then the guy's lying to him too. Like, when do you close? What time do you close? And he's like,
now's not a time. What time do you close?
Yeah. Now's not a time. I love that scene. It's one of my favorite scenes in there. And then he's just like, I don't know what to do with this guy. Call it.
I also love the line, the coin has traveled 22 years to get to this point, just as I have. Call it.
Yeah.
Yes.
And now it's here, and you have to call it. I can't call it for you. It wouldn't be fair.
And that's the thing I think is so interesting about Anton, is that the reason he's successful is because of his code of ethics. He never ceases from that trajectory, right? The entirety of the movie, except for with Carla Jean.
Yeah.
It's the only time that he does not follow his code of ethics, and Carla calls him on it by saying, I'm not going to call it because it's not the coin, it's you.
Yeah.
Whatever happens here, it's you.
Yeah.
And so what happens right after he breaks his own code? Gets into a car wreck.
He gets
Nearly
into a
dies.
car wreck.
Yeah.
And he's put into almost the exact same situation that Llewellyn Moss was in.
Was in
when he's
earlier
crossing
with the
border.
shirt, right?
Exact
Okay,
same
we got to talk
situation.
about that. We got to talk about that moment because that's my favorite moment of the film there. But yeah, go ahead.
So I showed Derek this. I found a video where Javier Bardem was kind of breaking down some of his characters a little bit. And he talked about his mindset for when he was acting as Anton. And he said that the world that he created for himself is he imagined that he was receiving like directions from a higher power of what's creating a better world, like a world where people earn what they work for and not they don't just marry into things.
Yeah.
And only the right tool is ever used.
Right.
Nothing superfluous.
And then there's what he asks, I can't remember his name, the other Woody Harrelson. He said, if the rule you followed... Carson Wells, that's right. He said, if the rule you followed brought you to this, then of what use was the rule? And Carson just goes, do you understand how crazy you are? And he doesn't even... He goes, you mean the nature of this conversation? He's like, dude, no, you... And
miserable trying to live in a perfect world that's imperfect.
Yeah,
it's just miserable.
He's the only perfect one, but he feels nothing. He has to distance himself from it, and that's what the coin does, and that's what his rationale of him being fate does. Is it separates him from the deed. He's just a part. He sees himself as an element.
He's just a vessel.
He's the perfect tool.
He's an element. He's an elemental villain who sees himself as an elemental person, and that's challenged and that's shaken. And I wonder in the car crash scene if he was pulled off focus, because I wonder if he questioned that a little bit.
Yeah,
I wonder if that's what led him to get
Carly
hit.
Definitely.
Well, because you see that moment where so in the film he goes back because he makes a whole thing with Luane where I keep saying Little Wayne.
Lil Wayne.
No way.
Wheezy.
I can't wait until the remake.
Imagine him just being
Oh
in
my
the film.
God.
Break everything. He's the guy with
As if he
green
did
hair and a
the-
bone in his nose.
He wrote the soundtrack, right, to a film that has no music. It's interesting because when he's, he feels like he has to go and finish Carla Jean off because of the moral. Again, it all comes back to that moral code, right? And he's like, well, your husband didn't save you, so I have to go do this, right? And when she challenges him that she's not going to call the coin toss, because he legitimately doesn't know what to do when he resorts to the coin. And there's a moment where they zoom in on his face and you see almost a tear welling up because almost.
Don't make me do it. Don't make me choose, kind of a thing.
Well, yeah, it's almost. Yeah, if you have to look really closely, but you almost see something there, right, in his eyes. And of course, we know that he decides to kill, but it's almost, I wonder with the T-bone, because I think there's a few things going on with that. I wonder if he knows or if he has this expectation that if he breaks the rule, something's going to happen to him and he just kind of lets it happen. Or either that, or he broke the rule and his guard is down and he didn't see it coming, right? But something's off about him in that moment, right? Whatever it is, him getting T-boned, he's off. And he's, of course, now in the same situation he put Josh Brolin's character in earlier in the movie. Now, this was my favorite part of the movie, rewatching it, because this is where the movie really came together for me in a lot of ways. There's conversations with the sheriff sprinkled throughout the movie about youth doing senseless things, right? You probably see where I'm going with this. You see these conversations, like he'll talk, like the beginning monologue that you mentioned, Jason. He has scenes just about youth putting spikes in their nose and right? But so there's this criticism in the film about youth, because again, it's No Country for Old Men, but youth, there's something that it's saying about that.
The world's changing.
Yeah, the world is changing, right? So you see earlier in the movie that when Josh Brolin's character needs the shirt, he sees some younger guys, but like young adults, and they're like, yeah, they want the money for the shirt. They want that. Now, of course, we see that
slice and dice.
Slice and dice. Yes, exactly. It's slice and dice.
Billy Berserk.
It's Frank Miller. It's Frank Miller land here. So when Anton needs the shirt, these two boys come up, and there's the innocence of the bike representing the train, right? But then here's what's interesting. The boy gives Anton Chigurh the shirt out of the goodness and kindness of his heart. He says, oh, I don't need any money. I'm just going to give it to you, right?
Yeah.
There's a bone sticking out.
There's a bone sticking out, yeah.
Look at that bone.
Well,
he says it twice. That's the only thing that character says.
Well, and the thing is the boys clearly, they haven't been in this world yet that all our other characters have been. This is their first look at it. Do you see where I'm going with this?
I just realized something.
So he gives him the shirt, and then Anton gives him the money anyways. Tells him to take it and says, "You didn't see me." So it's a bribe, right? He's essentially bribing them.
I was already gonna,
And then what's the next thing that happens when he walks away?
The boy says, part of that's mine, right? And then they start to argue. And
Yep.
goes, well,
I didn't lose my shirt.
Yeah, you ain't
I didn't lose my shirt. Yep.
He's like, no, he's like, you didn't lose your shirt. You still got a shirt. I ain't got my shirt.
Mm-hmm.
That innocence is corrupted.
The innocence
by
is
money.
corrupted by money, very much the same way Josh Brolin is corrupted at the beginning of the film by getting in this, right? So it's the greed and the violence, how they go hand in hand, right? Yeah.
And it's funny because it comes from a man who, in his own mind, he's following a directive to create a better world, but he's still planted a seed of greed.
Mm-hmm.
Wake
So-
of destruction behind him.
Yeah.
Everywhere he goes.
Yes.
He thinks he's doing this right, but he's still it's still his own justice. He's
Well-
still a man.
Well, and that's why, like, I think one of the things, like, he represents when he's T-Bone there is it's represented like, oh, like, justice will come eventually, right? To try to take this force of nature out, this chaos.
Yeah.
But then it always finds a way to get back up. Then this goes back to the speech that the sheriff has with his uncle, right? Where they have that whole conversation where his uncle's
You
just
can't
like,
stop what's coming.
you can't stop what's coming. Exactly. And it's always been like that. Like, it's nothing.
That to me is
Yeah.
the thing that it lands on that you're talking about. Is
Yes.
Ed Tom Bell.
Yeah,
Ed
let's
Tom
go.
Bell.
Live action.
What you thinking, Ed Tom? But he is under the belief that the world is changing. Everything we're talking about. But what is it that his cousin or Ellis, whatever the guy's name is, says world's always been this
like
way.
this. Yeah.
And that's the thing that he can't come to terms with, which is why he has to walk.
And that's why you can't kill Anton Chigurh. That's why you can't put him down. At the beginning of the film, they try to lock him up, put him away, put him somewhere.
They try to
Nope.
treat him like
And then-
Akon. Locked
yeah.
up, won't let me out.
Yeah. And then at the end of the film, what happens? Some force tries to take him out because you never see who did it, right?
Yeah. Oh, you do. He's dead.
He's dead.
Okay.
He's
Yeah.
like-
That's good.
Yeah. But then he just gets right back up, corrupts the innocent, keeps on walking.
He's
right?
still heavily
He'll-
damaged, though.
He's heavily damaged.
That's
So,
boom.
take that for what you will.
But we also know 2 previous instances in the movie, whenever he is damaged, he heals himself.
Yes.
So-
Yeah.
so
Ooh,
we are-
that's good
no
point.
one helps him.
We're not exactly. He doesn't need help. He never cringes. He never cries. He never yelps in
Yeah.
pain.
Oh my
He
God.
always heals himself. He has a gaping shotgun wound in his
And
thigh.
he's just like
that he
putting
just-
the antiseptic on it. And
He always finds a way.
just finds a way. So we know this guy walking with his own. He's not crying. Anything. We know he's going to be okay.
he's got
That's
blood in his
wild.
eye too. Oh, he's. But I'm not trying to
He's
force.
Terminator, bro.
Oh,
Okay.
100%.
All right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you gotta watch this movie. It's
Okay.
cool.
Okay.
If you're enjoying this conversation and you have a passion for storytelling and maybe you want to get better at telling your story through speaking or through writing, then I encourage you to check out our website, allthingsnarrative.com. When you get there, you'll see on our homepage that you can get an exclusive bonus episode of this podcast called 5 Tips to Improve Your Storytelling. All you have to do is sign up for our email list at our homepage, and you'll get that episode along with additional notifications about this podcast, about our workshops, coaching, classes, events, different things that we do to try to serve you in your story. So check out that link in the description. And now back to the conversation.
I feel like this is a cool double feature because The Godfather had order and then Don Corleone died, and then No Country for Old Men is just like 100 or 200 years in the future. Like they're getting worse and worse and worse. And Tommy Lee Jones is like, what is going on in this world? What, there is no order, and it's just the Michaels are rising, and Michael is just Anton Chigurh 300 years.
Well, they're both
Hey.
transition.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, they're both
This
transition
is the
points,
cinematic
right?
universe of Godfather.
Well, The Godfather, it's an interesting because it's a transition out of World War II into the 50s is a very complicated decade. You've got the Cold War on the one hand really kicking off, but you've also got this kind of American dream mentality returning to culture, right? So it's an interesting time they set The Godfather.
This
now
is
look
in
at
1980.
Now look at 1980 with No Country for Old Men, right? So that's another transition.
It's only 10 years.
Yeah.
Right? Man.
Well, I got worse
So-
quick. Hey.
So, well, yeah, so that 30-year gap, that transition with No Country, again, it's a turn of a decade. The world is changing. The way the 70s and the 80s, I mean, I didn't live through these decades, but the change that you could see happening and the rise of senseless violence and corruption and all that stuff, it's the evolution of where The Godfather started. And now we find ourselves in this very chaotic, wayward place where a lot of the times I have to remind myself with No Country, like, oh yeah, this is a pretty modern story. But there's a lot of things about it that is just like, man, this also just feels like a world that's so far gone.
It's also one of the things I think is really cool in regards to its conversation about America in general is that, so both of these films that we discussed are heavily influenced by Sergio Leone films.
Yes.
What Sergio Leone did with Westerns is fascinating because that is an Italian man.
Yes.
Takes an American concept and perfects it.
Yes.
And every film basically that we love since then has been inspired by Sergio Leone and what he did.
Absolutely. 100%.
And also he uses the rule of threes, the good, the bad, and the ugly. He uses that very clear, parallel in No Country for Old Men. I think it's also used constantly in The Godfather. But it's also interesting to me that then an Italian man, Francis Ford Coppola, an Italian-American, takes that, starts telling an American story inspired by Sergio Leone, has this entire sequence in Italy that is basically a Sergio Leone short film.
Short film. Yep, absolutely.
And then you have the Coen Brothers that continue to make these Western concepts, take inspiration from The Godfather, from the...
Are they Italian too?
Yeah. They're not, but
they're not Italian.
In standard white American fashion, they are just appropriating to the best of their ability. But
American.
But it's interesting because what they're all doing is having a commentary about what America means to them.
Yeah.
Because Sergio Leone is saying what the Wild West, that was America to him. What is it to Francis Ford Coppola? What is it to the Coen Brothers? And it's this concept of lost justice, this concept of a dream that fizzles out, that no longer exists, but also how no one will ever stop going for it. And I think that's an interesting kind of continuation is that these movies end with the story beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a very interesting there's a very interesting thing that's commentary that's going on with the America side in both films theologically, right? So we've already talked about The Godfather, but No Country, there's a theological point being made as well, right? So you have the sheriff who really talks about this absence of God in his life, that he thought God was going to find him and save him, and God hasn't done that for him, right? And his story ends very tragically. He's retired and he's lost his purpose in life.
He doesn't even know what to do for
He doesn't know what to do anymore. What's also interesting about No Country for Old Men is how it plays up the idea of the Good Samaritan. When you think about the
gosh. Yeah.
Did it just hit you?
Yeah.
Because when you think about the Good Samaritan, right? That's a big part of America's foundational. It's part of our story, right? It's a parable that resonated so much with America that we literally have Good Samaritan laws that are designed to protect people who try to do good, which is a far cry from where history has been. So
wild though.
So
you got to make laws for people that just want to help out.
Right. Well, and look what happens with the Good Samaritan in the No Country for Old Men.
Good Samaritans.
Yes.
They die.
So tell me about some of them that come to mind.
We got the guy who not necessarily stepped over to stop to help, but Anton is in a police car and he puts his siren on, has the guy step out. He's like, "Step out of the car, sir." Oh, what's this about? "Step out of the car, please." And he just listens, and Anton holds this cattle bolt up to the guy's head like he's checking his temperature, and the guy just kind of looks at it and then gets a hole in his head. And then there's the guy with the chicken coop who's just...
So the chicken coop guy is the guy I'm thinking of, right?
Yeah, he just stops over to give the guy a jump.
Yes.
And he's just, "Oh, well, you're trying to get to the airport? You could try this or this, or, oh, man, I've been there
That's a Good
before."
Samaritan right there.
Yeah, he did nothing wrong. He was just helping the guy out, and he goes, "Ain't you going to clamp those? Can you get those chicken coops out of the truck?" What are you talking about? And then cut to him. Yeah. You just cut. The next scene is him just rinsing chicken feathers out of the bed of a truck. And he's at a gas station. It's just like, jeez.
I mean, that's our time.
Yeah.
Like, how many times have you ever seen somebody and you just thought, I don't want to give him money because I don't know, or I don't know if I want to stop to help that person because what if they're going to pull out a gun? Like, that is a very real thing in our world, that as much as because we're all Christians in this room, right? We want to be Good Samaritans. We love that story. It's one of the hardest stories I've ever taught to young people, because I always get, especially where we used to work, I would always get that. But what if they do this? Or what if they tried that? We have such a world where it's hard to do good. And that's the struggle in No Country for Old Men, is it's hard to do good without being tainted by it. it. And that's why at the end, the boys are the Good Samaritan. They give the shirt to a man who's bleeding and it corrupts them. You can't not be corrupted by this sin, this evil, and how it spreads in this world.
Yeah, and that's the intro of the movie. What he's talking about is like, I know I'd be willing to die, but I don't know about losing my soul.
Mm-hmm.
And when he was talking to Ellis, he said, this country's hard on people. They almost said the title. They didn't. I'm really glad they didn't, but they hinted. They said, this country's hard on people.
Yeah.
Us two old men talking to each other that are out of it. Well, how often do you put a fresh pot on? I make a fresh pot every week, even if there's still some left.
You love that one. Yeah.
I love that too. I love how you see the hesitation of Ed Tom Tooher's this morning. He's like, how old is this coffee?
How often do you put a fresh pot on?
But to the the Good Samaritan, No Country for Good Samaritans.
Yeah.
That's the new title.
It's interesting because one thing you're bringing up with the Good Samaritan that I think is interesting in terms of the fable of America is there's an inherent tension. Is that we as Americans are taught that all good deeds get rewarded.
Yeah.
Good Samaritans don't do it for a reward.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's interesting too, because not a single one of the people in No Country for Old Men are doing it because of anything other than to do it.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
And what is their reward is death. We look at that as like, oh man, so should we do good? I don't know if these people would have thought those things because they're in their world, they do good. That's just it. That's the end of the story.
Right.
There's no reward necessary. And as Christians, our belief is that it's not about the reward, earthly reward.
Yeah, even if love is punished, it's worth
love.
it.
Yeah. And I think of the hotel front desk clerk as well.
That's a good...
He's paid to protect Llewellyn. And what happens to him? Killed by Anton Chigurh. You know what I mean? And then you have, and I think... Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The guy in the car gets shot and killed because he basically allows Llewellyn to get in the car. He's not fighting it. He's like, there's every single one.
If you are good in this movie, you are punished somehow. You know, that's... Carla Jean. That's right.
Carla Jean's mother dies.
she got the cancer.
Got the cancer.
Even her mother inadvertently kills Josh Brolin's character.
Yep. Yeah.
That brings me to one of my favorite lines in the beginning of the movie that is the foreshadowing of everything we're talking about is Llewellyn Davis is about to leave in the middle of the night to take water to the dying.
Yes. So good. There you go. Good Samaritan again, right there. If you give a cup of cold water to anyone in my name, and he's like, you know what? That guy was dying. I'm going to go give him some water.
And what happens when he gets there? The rest of the cartel is there.
Do these guys get punished for trying to be like Jesus?
And it's also interesting too, because what is the line he says before he leaves to go do it? Yeah. And then he says,
dumb as hell.
Exactly. And then he says, if I don't come back, tell mother I love her. And she says, Llewellyn, your mother's dead. And he says, then I'll tell her myself.
What I thought was cool is that I felt like she didn't get what he was trying to say, and he just said, I'll tell her so, because in his mind, he ain't gonna meet his mom. She is, but he's not. So that's why he was like, if I don't make it back, you tell my mom I love her. But your mom's dead. And he's like, well, I'll tell her myself. But that wasn't on his mind. I also this isn't important at all, but I think my thing that I'm going to use now, whenever anyone asks me where I got something, is what he said. Because she goes, where'd you get that gun? From the Getting Place.
Yeah.
I use that every time. You know what? I don't even want to ask. That'll work.
Their interactions are really funny. I think one of my... I told you this yesterday, Jason. One of my favorites is when they're having the argument about dealing with her mom because he's sending her away to go. And then she's like, I'm used to dealing with hard things. I work at Walmart. And I was just like, oh man, this movie, there's some levity in the midst of it.
If anyone has a point.
That's Coen Brothers,
Bring it up.
I mean, it's interesting just on the quick Coen Brothers thing, like in terms of, because Francis Ford Coppola has some of the best movies. Everybody doesn't have a lot of movies.
Right.
He also has a few duds. I mean, I'm sorry if anybody loves the movie Jack. I think that's a bit of a dud.
Never seen it.
I've never.
Yeah, don't worry.
Heard of it?
Robin Williams, may he rest in peace. Not a great movie. Coen
say,
Brothers
no,
do
not.
all the genres. They do all the genres.
They do.
And they do them all very, very, very well. Also, interestingly enough, I love in Barton Fink, you brought up Barton Fink, is deeply inspired by Sergei Eisenstein's Battleship Potemkin, which is 1925, one of the most inspirational films of all time because of its montage sequence on the Odessa steps, which is also referenced multiple times in The Godfather. So talk about these people, these filmmakers drinking from the same well of influence.
Yeah.
Sergio Leone, it's the Odessa steps. a sequence in Battleship Potemkin.
Odessa's the place where
Odessa, Texas.
Yeah.
Is where they're going in No
his
Country
wife
for Old
goes
Men.
to-
See, it's all connected, bro. It's all connected.
It's all connected.
There's a reason why we did these films together.
That's
I love that. That was one of my favorite things. Like they're literally just calling out their influences.
Yeah.
cool.
It's why once you watch a Sergio Leone movie, you'll never see Tarantino the same way again. You'll just be like, dude, this guy just rips off Leone all the time. Like literally, like this is the guy that Tarantino took everything from.
All the
And he
filmmakers-
added feet.
George Lucas, Francis Ford Coppola, Martin Scorsese, Tarantino, Christopher Nolan, Coen Brothers, Wes Anderson.
Mhm. Kyle, any other screenwriting things that you notice about this film or any final thought?
To go back to Godfather really quick, I think there's two things that I find really interesting in regards to storytelling is that a lot of times it's recommended that every story have a thumbprint moment, a moment that if you were to pluck it from the movie says everything you need to say.
Mm-hmm.
To me, The Godfather comes down to one line, which oddly enough is ad-libbed as well. It's with Carmenza saying, leave the gun, take the cannoli. And it's not just because that's a funny line. It's because what is the cannoli connected to in the previous scene? His wife. His wife says, bring home the cannoli. Don't forget the cannoli. What is the movie about? It's not about violence. It's about family.
Mm-hmm.
So The Godfather, from a screenwriting perspective, that line, I'm just like, that's it. That's the thumbprint. That is the also ad-lib, which I love. So Francis, there was no dialogue in that, which is great.
That's cool.
And then the guy just riffed on that. For No Country for Old Men, it breaks all the screenwriting conventions.
Yes.
It kills the main character off screen by not the main antagonist with an entire act remaining. And it forces us to identify with the antagonist. And this person that we did not know was a co-lead. Also, all three of the main characters never have scenes together except for the two shootouts between Anton and Josh Brolin's character. They're never actually in a scene together.
They're never physically.
They have one phone call.
Well, even in the shootout, you don't actually see him in the same frame, right?
No, you don't.
Yeah.
Well, only in the far distance.
In the distance, yeah.
And his shadow, because he is this devil-like character.
Mhm.
So the whole movie feels like you're leading to the confrontation between the good and the bad.
Of course.
That's not what it's about, though. It's about Ed Tom Bell's perspective on the world.
Yeah.
So it forces you. I remember seeing it in theaters and being like, no, he's not dead. He's not. What?
What was your? Can I ask you something? Because what were people's reaction in a theater to this movie?
Shock.
I'm sure.
man.
Absolute shock. And I was in. What year did it come out again?
2007.
So I was in film school. I just started film school. And so, of course, me and all my cohorts were like, let's go see it's a Coen Brothers movie. Woo! And then we're seeing this movie and blown away because I had just seen these two amazing Javier Bardem movies, Beautiful, and he had done another one. I forget the name, but I knew this was his first big American movie.
Yeah.
So I like by the Friendo coin toss scene, I'm like, this guy's winning an Oscar. Cut to a few months later, of course he did. But it was, to me, it was when you see Josh Brolin's dead body. Spoiler alert. It's also the first time, I was telling Nick this, is the first time I actually heard the score in the movie. Because the movie has basically no score.
Right.
So in that moment, as a filmmaker, I'm watching, wait, did he just die off screen by faceless villains before the confrontation with the bad guy, and it's the first time I'm hearing music? What? What is this movie? I have no idea what's going to happen next. But then the movie ends literally after Ed Tom Bell is talking about a nightmare he had about his father.
Yeah.
And it just stops.
and then
It
I
does
woke up,
not
and
at
it's
all
over.
feel like a last scene in a movie. It feels like we're still going somewhere. And it
feels
literally
incomplete.
hard cuts. Like after he is the last line, then I woke up.
And then I woke up.
Yeah. Which is, I think, one of my favorite last lines
And then the movie
ever in a film.
blinks out.
It's like the main character is actually chasing the story, but he's behind it and trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
Great way of putting it.
It's like,
Mm-hmm.
and I was thinking about it, it's like he's not confronting the violence or the story. It's confronting him. Like
Yep.
it's hurting him. He can't even like understand it. And he says, "I feel overmatched."
I just remember when I first saw the film, I thought something was wrong.
Yeah.
Like
I
I
missed
thought
something.
I was like,
Scenes are out of order.
what? Well, like you get to that scene, and then I was just like, but there's more movie left, right?
Yeah.
Like, no.
Yeah.
It just ends with all this unresolved tension.
Yeah. And also,
which is bold.
In writing in general, you're not supposed to have reactive characters. Every character has a goal that they're fulfilling, but Ed Tom Bell, who ends up being the main character, is only reactive.
Yeah.
Like if my students wrote that as a character, I'd be like, that's not how you write a character. But it works.
It works for what they're doing.
When you are masters, you can break the rules in the right direction. And so everything you're saying, it's like, I didn't understand how the movie ends with an inactive character saying, I'm scared, good night. You're like, what? The bad guy just survives? That's it? But that's the point. That's the point of the movie. It is the country as we know it is gone, but then as his cousin says, always been this way.
It's always been like that. Wow. So No Country for Old Men is not a traditional film by any stretch of the imagination. It does not at all leave you with this satisfying resolution or this sense of catharsis. It leaves you kind of hanging there, longing for a resolution. And I think this is how we feel in the modern world today. We look at the news and we want things to get better, but there's this sense that it's not, that it feels like we're stuck in these cycles of violence and hatred. And are we ever going to get out of them? And so when your moral code fails, when you have a worldview, a perception of things, and this is what I really relate to with Sheriff Tom Bell here, is as you get older and you start to see that the world isn't as clean cut or as black and white as you thought it was, that things are a lot more gray and there are things that you just don't understand. I think this is where our series that we did last month on masculinity and manhood really comes into play, because I think we have different options that we tend to take. So in RoboCop, again, another movie that's filled with corruption and crime, it could very well be in this series here. You have somebody that against their will becomes a tool of the state per se, that RoboCop is somebody that is meant to enforce justice. He's programmed to be a certain way, but it also cuts off his emotions, his feelings, his attachments to the world. And so I think that's one place that an ending like No Country for Lead Us is just to become somebody else's tool and to cut ourselves off from our humanity and just do our job, whatever it is. The second of these options is what you see in Fight Club, where you kind of go, screw the system, I'm going to do my own thing. That desire to want to bring about change, to try to find an outlet for this aggression, it eventually becomes an institution in and of itself. And so now you have that problem where you've created a system, you've created something now that when you're not careful, it can contribute and get caught in this web of this senseless evil and this violence in our world, because broken, fallen, imperfect people run these things. And so we can have the RoboCop attitude where we just kind of turn our emotions off. Fight Club is like our emotions get ramped up and we're leaning into them and we're angry and we are responding to the problem in our own way because it's all that we see is possible. And then the third option is what you saw in The Holdovers, where you accept, as hard and difficult as it is, you accept the things that you can't control. And you seek to figure out in your life, what is it that you do have control over? And making the most, making the best of it. And I love that in that film, the young man, Angus, he has multiple paths he could go down. And he's a great antithesis to that moment with Anton, with giving the kids the money, with corrupting them, right? As we shared in the conversation here. Paul is giving Angus in The Holdovers something that's incorruptible. And that's the possibility of a better path through that sacrifice that Paul makes of willing to lose his job so that Angus, who very well could screw up that opportunity, but Angus sees how much someone cares for him. And I think at the end of the day, it's our love, it's our compassion, it's our willingness to be the Good Samaritan, no matter how hard it is. That is what we hold on to. Our morals aren't always going to come through for us. Our moral code, our laws, they're not always going to work. But we don't give up. We press on. because we believe at the end of the day that there is hope for a better way. Maybe the world's always going to be like this. I don't know. But I do know that we have the capacity to impact the world around us for change, for the better. And that's what I invite you to think about, how to do that. And so this concludes our crime series, where we take a look at the harshness of life and why people are willing to go down these paths. Take care. Thank you for listening to the Live a Meaningful Story podcast, produced by All Things Narrative. If you'd like to learn more about our coaching, workshops, events, please check out allthingsnarrative.com. You can also follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at All Things Narrative. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing and leaving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, and tune in next time as we continue exploring the stories we love and the stories we live. Take care.